All right, let's begin with Chapter 2, or, as it's better known, the first chapter of Part 1, Above Silence. Kaladin and Shallan. We open with another quote, and this chapter is called Storm Blessed. You've killed me. Bastards! You've killed me! While the sun is still hot, I die. Collected on the 5th day of the week, Chak, of the month Beta, of the year 1171, 10 seconds before death. Subject was a dark-eyed soldier, 31 years of age. Sample is considered questionable. 5 years later.
I'm going to die, aren't I?
Ken asked. The weathered veteran beside Ken turned and inspected him. The veteran wore a full beard, cut short. At the sides, the black hairs were starting to give way to gray.
I'm going to die,
Ken thought, clutching his spear, the shaft slick with sweat.
I'm going to die. Oh, Stormfather, I'm going to die.
How old are you, son? The veteran asked. Ken didn't remember the man's name. It was hard to recall anything while watching the other army form lines across the rocky battlefield. That lining up seemed so civil, neat, organized. Short spears in the front ranks, long spears and javelins next, archers at the sides. The dark-eyed spearsmen wore equipment like Ken's leather jerkin and knee-length skirt, with a simple steel cap and a matching breastplate. Many of the Light Eyes had full suits of armor. They sat astride horses, their honor guards clustering around them with breastplates that gleamed burgundy and deep forest green. Were there shard-bearers among them? Bright Lord Amaram wasn't a shard-bearer. Were any of his men? What if Ken had to fight one? Ordinary men didn't kill shard-bearers. It happened so infrequently that each occurrence was now legendary.
It's really happening,
He thought, with mounting terror. This wasn't a drill in the camp. This wasn't training out in the fields, swinging sticks. This was real. Facing that fact, his heart pounding like a frightened animal in his chest, his legs unsteady, Ken suddenly realized that he was a coward. He shouldn't have left the herds. He should never have... Son, the veteran said, voice firm. How old are you?
15, sir.
And what's your name?
Ken, sir.
The mountainous, bearded man nodded. I'm Dalit.
Dalit,
Ken repeated, still staring out at the other army. There were so many of them. Thousands.
I'm going to die, aren't I?
No. Dalit had a gruff voice, but somehow that was comforting. You're going to be just fine. Keep your head on straight. Stay with the squad.
But I've barely had 3 months training.
He swore he could hear faint clangs from the enemy's armor or shields.
I can barely hold this spear. Stormfather, I'm dead. I can't...
Son, Dalit interrupted, soft but firm. He raised a hand and placed it on Ken's shoulder. The rim of Dalit's large round shield reflected the light from where it hung on his back. You are going to be fine.
How can you know?
It came out as a plea. Because, lad, you're in Kaladin Stormblessed's squad. The other soldiers nodded nearby in agreement. Behind them, waves and waves of soldiers were lining up, thousands of them. Ken was right at the front, with Kaladin's squad of about 30 other men. Why had Ken been moved to a new squad at the last moment? It had something to do with camp politics. Why was this squad at the very front, where casualties were bound to be the greatest? Small fierce-bren, like globs of purplish goo, began to climb up out of the ground and gather around his feet. In a moment of sheer panic, he nearly dropped his spear and scrambled away. Dalit's hand tightened on his shoulder. Looking up into Dalit's confident black eyes, Ken hesitated. "Did you piss before we formed ranks?" Dalit asked.
I didn't have time to.
"Go now.
Here?
If you don't, you'll end up with it running down your leg in battle, distracting you, maybe killing you. Do it." Embarrassed, Ken handed Dalit his spear and relieved himself onto the stones. When he finished, he shot glances at those next to him. None of Kaladin's soldiers smirked. They stood steady, spears to their sides, shields on their back. The enemy army was almost finished. The field between the two forces was bare, flat, slick rock, remarkably even and smooth, broken only by the occasional rock buds. It would have made a good pasture. The warm wind blew in Ken's face, thick with the watery scents of last night's high storm. "Dalit," a voice said. A man walked up through the ranks, carrying a short spear that had 2 leather knife sheaths strapped to the haft. The newcomer was a young man, perhaps 4 years older than Ken's 15, but he was taller by several fingers than even Dalit. He wore the common leathers of a spearman, but under them was a pair of dark trousers. That wasn't supposed to be allowed. His black Alethi hair was shoulder-length and wavy, his eyes a dark brown. He also had knots of white cord on the shoulders of his jerkin, marking him as a squad leader. The 30 men around Ken snapped to attention, raising their spears in salute.
This is Kaladin Stormblessed,
Ken thought incredulously.
This youth?
"Dalit, we're soon going to have a new recruit," Kaladin said. He had a strong voice. "I need you to—" He trailed off as he noticed Ken. "He found his way here just a few minutes ago, sir," Dalit said with a smile. "I've been getting him ready." "Well done," Kaladin said. "I paid good money to get that boy away from Gar. That man is so incompetent he might as well be fighting for the other side."
What?
Ken thought.
Why would anyone pay to get me?
"What do you think about the field?" Kaladin asked. Several of the other spearmen nearby raised their hands to shade of the sun, scanning the rocks. "That dip next to the 2 boulders on the far right?" Dalit asked. Kaladin shook his head. "Footing's too rough." "Aye, perhaps it is. What about the short hill over there? Far enough to avoid the first fall, close enough to not get too far ahead?" Kaladin nodded, though Ken couldn't see what they were looking at. "Looks good." "The rest of you louts hear that?" Dalit shouted. The men raised their spears high. "Keep an eye on the new boy, Dalit," Kaladin said. "He won't know the signs." "Of course," Dalit said, smiling. Smiling? How could the man smile? The enemy army was blowing horns. Did that mean they were ready? Even though Ken had just relieved himself, he felt a trickle of urine run down his leg. "Stay firm," Kaladin said, then trotted down the front line to talk to the next squad leader over. Behind Ken and the others, the dozens of ranks were still growing, the archers on the sides prepared to fire. "Don't worry, son," Dalit said. "We'll be fine. Squad leader Kaladin is lucky." The soldier on the other side of Ken nodded. He was a lanky, red-haired Vaden, with darker tan skin than the Alethi. Why was he fighting in an Alethi army? "That's right. Kaladin. He's Stormblessed. Right sure he is. We only lost, what, 1 man last battle?"
But someone did die.
Dalit shrugged. People always die. Our squad loses the fewest. You'll see. Kaladin finished conferring with the other squad leader, then jogged back to his team. Though he carried a short spear, meant to be wielded one-handed with his shield in the other hand, his was a hand longer than those held by the other men. At the ready, men! Dalit called. Unlike the other squad leaders, Kaladin didn't fall into rank, but stood out in front of his squad. The men around Ken shuffled, excited. The sounds were repeated through the vast army, the stillness giving way before eagerness. Hundreds of feet shuffling, shields slapping, clasps clanking. Kaladin remained motionless, staring down the other army. Steady, men, he said without turning. Behind, a light-eyed officer passed on horseback. Be ready to fight. I want their blood, men. Fight and kill. Steady, Kaladin said again, after the man passed. Be ready to run, Dalit said to Ken.
Run? But we've been trained to march in formation, to stay in our line.
Sure, Dalit said, but most of the men don't have much more training than you. Those who can fight will end up getting sent to the Shattered Plains to battle the Parshendi. Kaladin's trying to get us into shape to go there, to fight for the king. Dalit nodded down the line. Most of these here will break and charge. The Light Eyes aren't good enough commanders to keep them information. So stay with us and run.
Should I have my shield out?
Around Kaladin's team, the other ranks were unhooking their shields, but Kaladin's squad left their shields on their back. Before Dalit could answer, a horn blew from behind. Go! Ken didn't have much choice. The entire army started moving in a clamor of marching boots. As Dalit had predicted, the steady march didn't last long. Some men began yelling, the roar taken up by others. Light Eyes called for them to go, run, fight. The line disintegrated. As soon as that happened, Kaladin's squad broke into a dash, running out into the front at full speed. Ken scrambled to keep up, panicked and terrified. The ground wasn't as smooth as it had seemed, and he nearly tripped over a hidden rock bud, vines withdrawn into its shell. He righted himself and kept going, holding his spear in one hand, his shield clapping against his back. The distant army was in motion as well, their soldiers charging down the field. There was no semblance of a battle formation or a careful line. This wasn't anything like the training had claimed it would be. Ken didn't even know who the enemy was. A landlord was encroaching on Bright Lord Amaram's territory. The land owned, ultimately, by High Prince Sadeas. It was a border skirmish, and Ken thought it was with another Alethi princedom. Why were they fighting each other? Perhaps the king would have put a stop to it, but he was on the Shattered Plains, seeking vengeance for the murder of King Gavilar 5 years before. The enemy had a lot of archers. Ken's panic climbed to a peak as the first wave of arrows flew into the air. He stumbled again, itching to take out his shield, but Dalit grabbed his arm and yanked him forward. Hundreds of arrows split the sky, dimming the sun. They arced and fell, dropping like sky eels upon their prey. Amaram's soldiers raised their shields, but not Kaladin's squad. No shields for them. Ken screamed, and the arrows slammed into the middle ranks of Amaram's army, behind him. Ken glanced over his shoulder, still running. The arrows fell behind him. Soldiers screamed. Arrows broke against shields. Only a few straggling arrows landed anywhere near the front ranks.
Why?
He yelled at Dalit.
How did you know?
They want the arrows to hit where the men are most crowded, the large man replied, where they'll have the greatest chance of finding a body. Several other groups in the van left their shields lowered, but most ran awkwardly with their shields angled up to the sky, worried about arrows that wouldn't hit them. That slowed them, and they risked getting trampled by men behind who were getting hit. Ken itched to raise his shield anyway. It felt so wrong to run without it. The second volley hit, and men screamed in pain. Kaladin's squad barreled toward the enemy soldiers, some of whom were dying to arrows from Amaram's soldiers. Ken could hear... Amaram? Mm-hmm.
This is Amaranth.
No, Amaram.
I was like, what's she doing here?
No, Amaram, the guy that they're fighting for currently.
Yeah.
Ken could hear the enemy soldiers bellowing war cries, could make out individual faces. Suddenly, Kaladin's squad pulled to a halt, forming a tight group. They'd reached the small incline that Kaladin and Dalit had chosen earlier. Dalit grabbed Ken and shoved him to the very center of the formation. Kaladin's men lowered their spears, pulling out shields as the enemy bore down on them. The charging foe used no careful formation. They didn't keep the ranks of long spears in the back and short spears in the front. They all just ran forward, yelling in a frenzy. Ken stumbled to get his shield unlatched from his back. Clashing spears rang in the air as squads engaged one another. A group of enemy spearsmen rushed up to Kaladin's squad, perhaps coveting the higher ground. The 36 attackers had some cohesion, though they weren't in as tight as a formation as Kaladin's squad was. The enemy seemed determined to make up for it in passion. They bellowed and screamed in fury, rushing Kaladin's line. Kaladin's team held rank, defending Ken as if he were some light eyes and they were his honor guard. The two forces met with a crash of metal on wood, shields slamming together. Ken cringed back. It was over in a few eye blinks. The enemy squad pulled back, leaving 2 dead on the stone. Kaladin's team hadn't lost anyone. They held their bristling V formation. The one man stepped back and pulled out a bandage to wrap a thigh wound. The rest of the men closed in to fill the spot. The wounded man was hulking and thick-armed. He cursed, but the wound didn't look too bad. He was on his feet in a moment, but didn't return to the place where he'd been. Instead, he moved down to one end of the V formation, a more protected spot. The battlefield was chaos. The two armies mingled indistinguishably. Sounds of clanging, crunching, and screaming churned in the air. Many of the squads broke apart, members rushing from one encounter to another. They moved like hunters, groups of 3 or 4 seeking lone individuals, then brutally falling on them. Kaladin's team held its ground, engaging only enemy squads that got too close. Was this what a battle really was? Ken's practice had trained him for long ranks of men, shoulder to shoulder. Excuse me for a second. Watermelon. There we go. Not this frenzied intermixing. The brutal pandemonium. Why didn't more hold formation?
The real soldiers are all gone, Ken thought. All fighting in a real battle at the Shattered Plains. No wonder Kaladin wants to get his squad there.
Spears flashed on all sides. It was difficult to tell friend from foe, despite the emblems on breastplates and colored paint on shields. The battlefield broke down into hundreds of small groups, like 1,000 different wars happening at the same time. After the first few exchanges, Dalit took Ken by the shoulder and placed him in the rank at the very bottom of the V pattern. Ken, however, was worthless. When Kaladin's team engaged enemy squads, all of his training fled him. It took everything he had just to remain there, holding his spear outward and trying to look threatening. For the better part of an hour, Kaladin's squad held their small hill, working as a team, shoulder to shoulder. Kaladin often left his position at the front, rushing this way and that, banging his spear on his shield in a strange rhythm.
Those are signals.
Ken realized as Kaladin's squad moved from the V into a ring. With the screams of the dying and the thousands of men calling to others, it was nearly impossible to hear a single person's voice. But the sharp clang of the spear against the metal plate on Kaladin's shield was clear. Every time they changed formations, Dalek grabbed Ken by the shoulder and steered him. Kaladin's team didn't chase down stragglers. They remained on the defensive, and while several of the men in Kaladin's team took wounds, none of them fell. Their squad was too intimidating for the smaller groups. The larger units retreated after a few exchanges, seeking easier foes. Eventually something changed. Kaladin turned, watching the tides of battle with discerning brown eyes. He raised his spear and smacked his shield in a quick rhythm he hadn't used before. Dalek grabbed Ken by the arm and pulled him away from the small hill. Why abandon it now? Just then, the larger body of Amarem's force broke, the men scattering. Ken hadn't realized how poorly the battle in this quarter had been going for his side. As Kaladin's team retreated, they passed many wounded and dying, and Ken grew nauseated. Soldiers were sliced open, their insides spilling out. He didn't have time for horror. The retreat quickly turned into a rout. Dalek cursed, and Kaladin beat his shield again. The squad changed direction, heading eastward. There, Ken saw a larger group of Amarem soldiers was holding. But the enemy had seen the ranks break, and that made them bold. They rushed forward in clusters, like wild axe hounds hunting stray hogs. Before Kaladin's team was halfway across the field of dead and dying, a large group of enemy soldiers intercepted them. Kaladin reluctantly banged his shield. His squad slowed. Ken felt his heart begin to pump faster and faster. Nearby, a squad of Amarem's soldiers was consumed. Men stumbled and fell, screaming, trying to get away. The enemy used their spears like skewers, killing men on the ground like cremlings. Kaladin's men met the enemy in a crash of spears and shields. Bodies shoved on all sides, and Ken was spun about. In the jumble of friend and foe, dying and killing, Ken grew overwhelmed. So many men running in so many directions. He panicked, scrambling for safety. A group of soldiers nearby wore Alethi uniforms. Kaladin's squad. Ken ran for them, but when someone turned toward him, Ken was terrified to realize he didn't recognize them. This wasn't Kaladin's squad, but a small group of unfamiliar soldiers holding an uneven, broken line. Wounded and terrified, they scattered as soon as an enemy squad got close. Ken froze, holding his spear in a sweaty hand. The enemy soldiers charged right for him. His instincts urged him to flee. Yet he had seen so many men picked off one at a time. He had to stand. He had to face them. He couldn't run. He yelled, stabbing his spear at the lead soldier. The man casually knocked the weapon aside with his shield, then drove his short spear into Ken's thigh. The pain was hot. So hot that the blood spurting out of his leg felt cold by comparison. Ken gasped. The soldier yanked the weapon free. Ken stumbled backward, dropping his spear and shield. He fell to the rocky ground, splashing in someone else's blood. His foe raised a spear high, a looming silhouette against the stark blue sky, ready to ram it into Ken's heart. And then he was there. Squad leader, storm-blessed. Kaladin's spear came as if out of nowhere, narrowly deflecting the blow that was to have killed Ken. Kaladin set himself in front of Ken, alone, facing down the 6 spearmen. He didn't flinch. He charged. It happened so quickly. Kaladin swept the feet from beneath the man who had stabbed Ken. Even as that man fell, Kaladin reached up and flipped a knife from one of the sheaths tied about his spear. His hand snapped, knife flashing and hitting the thigh of a second foe. That man fell to one knee, screaming. A third man froze, looking at his fallen allies. Kaladin shoved past a wounded enemy and slammed his spear into the gut of the third man. A fourth man fell with a knife to the eye. When had Kaladin grabbed that knife? He spun between the last two, his spear a blur, wielding it like a quarterstaff. For a moment, Ken thought he could see something surrounding the squad leader, a warping of the air, like the wind itself become visible.
I've lost a lot of blood. It's flowing out so quickly.
Kaladin spun, knocking aside attacks, and the last two spearmen fell with gurgles that Ken thought sounded surprised. Foes all down, Kaladin turned and knelt beside Ken. The squad leader set aside his spear and whipped a white strip of cloth from his pocket, then efficiently wrapped it tight around Ken's leg. Kaladin worked with the ease of one who had bound wounds dozens of times before.
Kaladin, sir,
Ken said, pointing at one of the soldiers Kaladin had wounded. The enemy held his leg as he stumbled to his feet. In a second, however, Mountainous Dalit was there, shoving the foe with his shield. Dalit didn't kill the wounded man, but let him stumble away, unarmed. The rest of the squad arrived and formed a ring around Kaladin, Dalit, and Ken. Kaladin stood up, raising his spear to his shoulder. Dalit handed him back his knives, retrieved from the fallen foes. "Had me worried there, sir," Dalit said, "running off like that."
I knew you'd follow,
Kaladin said. "Raise the red banner. Sin, Corridor, you're going back with the boy. Dalit, hold here. Emram's line is bulging in this direction. We should be safe soon." "And you, sir?" Dalit asked. Kaladin looked across the field. A pocket had opened in the enemy forces, and a man rode there on a white horse, swinging about him with a wicked mace. He wore full plate armor, polished and gleaming silver.
a shard bearer,
Ken said. Dalit snorted. "No, thank the Stormfather. Just a light-eyed officer. Shard bearers are far too valuable to waste on a minor border dispute." Kaladin watched the light eyes with a seething hatred. It was the same hatred that Ken's father had shown when he'd spoken of Chull rustlers, or the hatred Ken's mother would display when someone mentioned Kusiri, who had run off with the cobbler's son. "Sir?" Dalit said hesitantly. "Sub-squads 2 and 3. Pincer pattern," Kaladin said, his voice hard. "We're taking a Bright Lord off his throne." "You sure that's wise, sir? We've got wounded." Kaladin turned toward Dalit. "That's one of Hallow's officers. He might be the one." "You don't know that, sir." "Regardless, he's a battalion lord. If we kill an officer that high, we're all but guaranteed to be in the next group sent to the Shattered Plains. We're taking him." His eyes grew distant. "Imagine it, Dalit. Real soldiers. A war camp with discipline, and Light Eyes with integrity. A place where our fighting skills will mean something." Dalit sighed, but nodded. Kaladin waved to a group of his soldiers. Then they raced across the field. A smaller group of soldiers, including Dalit, waited behind with the wounded. One of those, a thin man with black Alethi hair speckled with a handful of blonde hairs, marking some foreign blood, pulled a long red ribbon from his pocket and attached it to his spear. He held the spear aloft, letting the ribbon flap in the wind. "It's a call for runners to carry our wounded off the field," Dalit said to Ken. "We'll have you out of here soon. You were brave, standing up to those 6.
Fleeing seems stupid.
Ken said, trying to take his mind off his throbbing leg.
With so many wounded on the field, how can we think that the runners will come for us?
Squad leader Kaladin bribes them, Dalit said. They usually only carry off light eyes, but there are more runners than there are wounded light eyes. The squad leader puts most of his pay into the bribes.
This squad is different,
Ken said, feeling lightheaded. Told ya.
not because of luck, because of training.
Well, that's a part of it. Part of it is because we know if we get hurt, Kaladin will get us off the battlefield. He paused, looking over his shoulder. As Kaladin had predicted, Amaram's line was surging back, recovering. The mounted enemy Light Eyes from before was energetically laying about with his mace. A group of his honor guard moved to one side, engaging Kaladin's sub-squads. The Light Eyes turned his horse. He wore an open-fronted helm that had sloping sides and a large set of plumes on its top. Ken couldn't make out his eye color, but he knew it would be blue or green, maybe yellow or light gray. He was a Bright Lord, chosen at birth by the heralds, marked for rule. He impassively regarded those who fought nearby. Then, one of Kaladin's knives took him in the right eye. The Bright Lord screamed, falling back off the saddle as Kaladin somehow slipped through the lines and leaped upon him, spear raised. Aye, it's part of training, Dalit said, shaking his head. But it's mostly him. He fights like a storm, that one, and thinks twice as fast as other men. The way he moves sometimes.
He bound my leg,
Ken said, realizing he was beginning to speak nonsense due to the blood loss. Why point out the bound leg? It was a simple thing. Dalit just nodded. He knows a lot about wounds. He can read glyphs, too. He's a strange man. For a lowly, dark-eyed spearman, our squad leader is. He turned to Ken. But you should save your strength, son. The squad leader won't be pleased if we lose you. Not after what he paid to get you.
Why?
Ken asked. The battlefield was growing quieter, as if many of the dying men had already yelled themselves hoarse. Almost everyone around them was an ally, but Dalit still watched to make sure no enemy soldiers tried to strike at Kaladin's wounded.
Why, Dalit?
Ken repeated, feeling urgent.
Why bring me into his squad? Why me?
Dalit shook his head. It's just how he is. Hates the thought of young kids like you, barely trained, going to battle. Every now and again, he grabs one and brings them into his squad. A good half-dozen of our men were once like you. Dalit's eyes got a far-off look. I think you all remind him of someone. Ken glanced at his leg. Painspren, like small orange hands with overly long fingers, were crawling around him, reacting to his agony. They began turning away, scurrying in other directions, seeking other wounded. His pain was fading. His leg, his whole body, feeling numb. He leaned back, staring up at the sky. He could hear faint thunder. That was odd. The sky was cloudless. Dalit cursed. Ken turned, shocked out of his stupor. Galloping directly towards them was a massive black horse, bearing a rider in gleaming armor that seemed to radiate light. The armor was seamless. No chain underneath, just smaller plates. Incredibly intricate. The figure wore an unornamented full helm, and the plate was gilded. He carried a massive sword in one hand, fully as long as a man was tall. It wasn't a simple, straight sword. It was curved, and the side that wasn't sharp was rigid, like flowing waves, etchings covering its length. It was beautiful, like a work of art. Ken had never seen a shard bearer, but he knew immediately what this was. How could he ever have mistaken a simple armored light eyes for one of these majestic creatures? Hadn't Dalet claimed there would be no shard bearers on this field? Dalet scrambled to his feet, calling for the sub-squad to form up. Ken just sat where he was. He couldn't have stood, not with that leg wound. He felt so lightheaded. How much blood had he lost? He could barely think. Either way, he couldn't fight. He didn't fight something like this. Sun gleamed against that plate armor, and that gorgeous, intricate, sinuous sword. It was like the Almighty himself had taken form to walk into the battlefield. And why would you want to fight the Almighty? Ken closed his eyes. And that's the end of the chapter.
Whoa.
Edgy as fuck, baby.
And it's like, can I not go to war? And they say no.
No, Ken just feels... I think what's going on... Again, I read this book a while ago. Ken is in a space of... He wanted to go to war, but he thought it would be like... the idea of war. Instead of,
What it actually is. Which is like, wait, we were supposed to walk in line together. They're like, nah.
Nah. Just don't, try not to die. That's the ruling.
Just don't die.
Basically. All right. One more chapter?
I mean, Krabs is about to leave.
I was asking you.
Me. We're 3 chapters in.
Yep.
Maybe we should, because
There's a lot of chapters, and it's also a series.
Yeah, it's like, because I know that Maddie wanted to also do the thing, basically. So I'm thinking like, maybe we should wait.
Oh, Maddie wanted to be here for it?
Or yeah. Because at least, we started while she was here.
Well, I'll send the video to her after this. But anyways, I think that's a good place to leave off.
We're at 3 hours. I think that's a good place.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to leave off. All right.
Also, I beat Krabs.
I'm very proud of you. And I'm very proud of the rest of you at home. You're doing wonderfully. Keep up the good work. I'm proud of you.
Daddy's proud of you.
Don't call me daddy.
I'm not calling you daddy. I'm just saying what you said.
Uh-huh. So you want to be called daddy, in other words.
No.
I understand. It's all right. Just because I don't share your kinks doesn't mean anything.
My kids to call me Pop.
I feel like Pop is such a good dad name.
I call my dad Pops.
Yeah. My kids, they're going to call me Pops. Easily. Easy answers. But anyways, cheers to all of you. Drink water.
Krabs was lagging.
Love you all.
Love you more, though.
Not possible.
Nah.
Love you all. My thumbs are very small, but love you.
Love you most.
Good night.
Good night.